Now that we've talked about putting together a sample breakfast, lunch, and dinner, let's talk about what are some other things you can do to make food taste really good, but at the same time, not use up a huge chunk of your daily allotment of macros. So, first is fresh herbs, often underlooked, also very nutrient dense as well. So, things like fresh basil, parsley, cilantro, rosemary. Fresh herbs go a long way to make things taste very bright and vibrant, but don't add anything additional. Same thing is true of garlic and onions. So think of using food from a spice perspective first. We have Mrs. Dash listed on here. It's not my absolute favorite, but if you are looking for a seasoning that is lower in sodium and that's a concern for you, Mrs. Dash is an option. There's a brand online that's very popular called Flavor God that has a wide range of flavors and they're fresh and natural and tend to be lower in sodium as well. Vinegars, I can't say enough great thing about vinegars, and it's often a lot of times when people are making food and cooking, they'll tend to reach for salt first when a lot of times you could use vinegar instead. And there's a wide range, right? There's not just traditional vinegar that you think about, but like red wine vinegar, a splash on a salad is delicious. You actually don't even need the olive oil if you just use red wine vinegar. Same thing is true for balsamic vinegar. Apple cider vinegar has a huge range of health benefits and is great. There's even in most every city, there's typically an olive oil and vinegar bar or store where you can go, and there's all kinds of creative flavors that you can try. But vinegars are, I'd say, widely underutilized when it comes to spicing things up and changing the flavor of food, but not adding a lot of, or any macros for that matter. Cinnamon, we've already talked about the benefits of cinnamon and how, don't just think of things like adding it to oatmeal, but think about adding it into Greek yogurt or putting it on a sweet potato with just a little bit of sea salt, and that makes a delicious treat. And then vanilla extract is another one, again, that often gets underutilized. So adding that into oatmeal, it's a standard to me. It's like the secret to making really good pancakes or waffles is to always have at least a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And the quality does matter here. So the higher the quality, the more flavor you're going to get, and you're going to be able to tell a difference. So don't always just immediately reach for things like salt or things that or condiments that might be higher in macros. For example, like ketchup, high in sugar, you're going to get more carbs. Don't always go for that, but try to think of things more natural as your first line to be able to spice your flavors up and make things taste a little bit different. Let's talk about filling in your numbers. So, as I mentioned in the first part of this presentation, I want you to think about your allotment of numbers throughout the day and pre-logging things. So ideally, let's say that I'm going to just use a random example. You have 120 grams of protein. That's your target for the day from a protein standpoint. Well, if you back into that and you do the math, you know that if you have a breakfast and a lunch that is, extremely low in protein, so, anything less than like 20 grams, then the rest of the day you're going to be kind of working from behind. You're going to be in a deficit around your protein. So for me personally, I like to try to hit a certain target at each meal. So, somewhere around 30 grams for me and my numbers, around 30 grams for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then try to fill in my numbers from there. So again, if it's protein, a good quality protein shake can be an easy way to do that. Quality, again, I'll emphasize here because please stay away from like pre-packaged, pre-made up protein shakes and things like that are shelf stable. They tend to have a lot of junky ingredients, a lot of artificial things, and it's really not ideal for your body. So if you're going to do a protein shake, just make sure that you've sought out a good quality, a good brand that doesn't have a lot of fillers and a lot of additives. That's an easy way to fill in your numbers, especially for a guy that's on macros. A protein shake daily is almost necessary for you to hit your target, unless you really want to eat a lot of protein. which is fine. Some people enjoy that. Greek yogurt, I've already mentioned, is another really great way. Try to start with the plain. Where you get into trouble is when you go with the strawberries and the vanillas and all of that, because those tend to be higher in carbs. And so I would encourage you to do a Greek yogurt and then add in your own flavorings. So things again like cinnamon. One of my favorite is frozen cherries. Let those de-thaw a little bit and add those into Greek yogurt. Fruit obviously is an easy, berry specifically. And then egg and egg whites we've already talked about, but egg whites specifically are an easy option when you're trying to add in protein to something, or that you find yourself at the end of the day and you have a gap. Don't overlook, even though it's simple, using eggs or egg whites are helpful. Carb sources, so when you're, again, think about filling in your numbers, fruit is always an easy option. If somebody can't hit their carb, number one, to me that's the easiest one to hit. But if you do struggle, again, think nutrient density first. So fruit tends to be the easiest way or the most nutrient dense source to get carbs in. Not only fruit, but that's a place to start. Berries tend to be the lowest, so you get the most volume for the least amount of carbs. So for example, eating 100 grams of strawberries versus 100 grams of banana, it's going to look very differently. First of all, in terms of not weighing them out, but if you're trying to hit a certain macro count, bananas are much more higher in carbs, where strawberries and blueberries, blackberries, raspberries are lower. So you can eat more of a berry for a lower amount of carbs versus, say, a banana, other tropical fruits, mango, pineapple, etc. Hope that makes sense. Another easy carb source, again, sweet potatoes are easy. Think of good quality grains like jasmine rice, brown rice, Ezekiel bread we've talked about. There's all kinds of different ways for you to fill in there. And then from a fat standpoint, nut butters are the easiest way. So almond butter, peanut butter, cashew butter are really simple. And then if you find yourself really low, good quality oil. So, drizzling olive oil over a salad, using a good quality butter in rice. If you find yourself really low on fats, there's a lot of different things you can do to be creative around that. But that's some quick examples of if you find yourself needing to fill in around your main meals, what can you do? A couple of high-level kind of tips around logging your numbers. So I've mentioned there's a lot of advantages to pre-logging your day. And what I mean by that, not just pre-logging a meal, which is a standard, right? Meaning we don't eat anything until we log it. But for me personally, I love the night before to pre-log my entire day. So in other words, in my food diary app, I will go ahead and enter everything that I know that I'm going to eat the next day. And most of us tend to have a pretty good idea. What are the advantages of doing that? So first of all, it's less, have you ever heard of decision fatigue, where you're constantly bombarded with, should I eat this, should I not? Is this a better choice, or is this should I do this instead? It removes that, which at the same time removes temptation. And so it just makes you more efficient and makes it a lot simpler to hit your numbers. Again, think about what you already have in your fridge or your pantry and how you eat typically. Don't try, to take on this approach of I'm going to overhaul everything that I do. Start with where you are and log with what's real for you and your life and your family. Do consider how frequently that you eat out and travel. Most chain restaurants, you can look up online the menu and pre-log, and so if you're going to go to, I'll use an easy example, Longhorn Steakhouse, and you're going to have a salmon and sweet potato that night. Well, that information from a nutritional standpoint is on their website. And so you can find that and pre-log it so that when you get to the restaurant, you're not feeling any degree of anxiety or, again, decision fatigue or what should I get, what's the best option, because you've looked and planned ahead of time. And just know when you are eating out, you are going to get more, specifically sodium, and probably more fat. That's just a standard. And so to be successful when you're doing a macro challenge, if you are eating out, 5 to 7 times a week, yeah, your progress is probably going to be impeded by that. There's just no way around it. And so that is something that you have to consider. It's not that you can't eat out. I would just look at the frequency of that, and be aware that it is going to influence and impact how successful that you'll be on your challenge. Another point, a really important point, is the importance of selecting the correct item from your food tracking database, if that's MyFitnessPal. A lot of entries that are in MyFitnessPal were entered by other people, and shockingly, people don't always enter stuff correctly. So if you've entered, let's use salmon as an example, and you see that it has 0 fat, you know that that's impossible because salmon has fat. And so it's going to be very important that you verify what you've selected from the database is actually correct. And some of that's just common sense. Again, if you see a sweet potato that has 5 carbs, that's not possible unless you had like a sliver, tiny amount. But otherwise, you just want to make sure that you're tracking and selecting the right items from the database. If you use the barcode scanner on your app, same thing. Just make sure that once you scan an item, that it does match what is on your food label, because discrepancies happen. I've seen it. Lots of people see it. And that last point we talked about already, think about dividing up your protein evenly throughout the day. Specifically for women, this tends to be a struggle if you've not been one to be focused on how much protein that you're consuming. A lot of times when women first start tracking, they get to the end of the day and they have, 40 grams of protein left because they maybe had oatmeal only for breakfast, which had, 9 grams of protein. So when you start out that small for breakfast, the entire rest of your day, you're working from a deficit. So it's going to be important to try to space that and even that out. It'll just make it a lot easier for you to hit your numbers at the end of the day. Just want to go through a couple of frequently asked questions that come up whenever someone starts macro tracking. What do we consider hitting macros? So we consider plus or minus 3 on either side of a number as hitting it. So for example, if 120 is how many grams of protein that you should eat a day, we consider hitting it 123 or 117 on either side of that. Now we prefer you to stay very tight on carbs and fat. If there is going to be one macro that you bump over slightly, meaning above 3, then protein is the category we would prefer to see that in. It's not going to impede your progress as much as if you exceed highly on carbs or fat. Another question that comes up often is, why at the end of the day don't my calories match? So you've hit your numbers, your macro numbers, but your calorie values don't match. And that's just simply because the FDA does allow discrepancies. And again, on food labeling, and also MyFitnessPal does have errors. And so sometimes that's why your calories don't match up. Alcohol, can I drink it? It always comes up when people start macro tracking. The short answer is that's up to you. The biggest thing we want you to know is that it does impede the fat burning process. So when you choose to drink alcohol, you can track it and technically be meeting your macros, but your fat burning efficiency is greatly reduced when alcohol enters our body. Our recommendation is that if you're doing a challenge, is that you consider abstaining during whatever time period that you're focused on this, or greatly reducing consumption. If you're doing a couple of glasses of wine or beer a week, you're just really going to impede your progress from a fat burning standpoint. Eating out, I've already mentioned about looking online so that you know what options are available. Also, if you're going to eat at a restaurant that is not a chain restaurant, you also can pick the closest thing. So let's say it's a burger restaurant that's maybe a independently owned place. Well, then pick a hamburger from a comparable place. Just because it's not in the database, that exact one, doesn't mean you can't select it. Sweet potato fries, if you're going to have those, but there's not one in the database for that restaurant, just pick somewhere else. And it's always better to overestimate your numbers when you eat out versus underestimate, or otherwise you're likely to be off on your tracking.